All right, very good. So today we're going to be going over noun case usage. Then I'm going to let you guys go to work on your translations. Let's start at the beginning with the easiest one. What does the nominative case do? We should know two different uses for the nominative case. Because I can't see you guys, just feel free to shout out your answer.
Subject.
Very good. Subject. All right, and what's the other case use that we know of for the nominative? Say that again?
Predicate, nominative.
Predicate, very good. Subject and predicate.
Nominative.
All right, what does the subject do in a sentence?
It's the thing or person doing the action.
Yeah, very good. It's the actor, right, if that helps, or it's the thing doing the verb. How about the predicate or predicate nominative? When will we see a predicate nominative? Anybody know? Right. The predicate.
It renames the subject.
Say that again?
It renames the subject.
Yeah, exactly. It renames the subject. The predicate nominative will be on the other side of a being verb, right? So we'll almost always see this in being verb constructions, right? So the subject is the predicate, right? Jeez. Right, so if I said that, right, Tom is a boy, right? If I say Tom is a boy, we can see Tom is the subject, is our being verb, and boy is the predicate. Does that make sense to everybody? This is the sort of most easy and obvious case. Good. All right, let's go on to the genitive. We've learned some new uses for the genitive in the past couple of weeks. Right, last week in particular, I believe we learned 3 new uses. Right, so I think we know 4 total. What's the most obvious or common use of the genitive that we've run into?
Possession.
Very good. The first one's possession, right? And what do we mean by possession?
Ownership or belonging.
Yeah. So the genitive, right, will almost always be a noun modifying another noun, right? So if I say, whose coffee? Tyler's coffee, right? In the same way as if I said what kind of coffee and I said hot coffee or cold coffee or whatever, right? It works similarly to an adjective, right? And we can express it in one of 2 ways. We can either in English use an apostrophe S or use the preposition of, right? So yeah, possession is a noun modifying, which is not my favorite word to spell, modifying another noun regarding ownership. All right, what was the next one that we learned?
Origin.
Yeah, very good. Right, how would you describe origin?
Like where a person or group is from.
Yeah, very good. Right, so origin is a noun modifying another noun regarding, right, place. Right? So if I said that she is Selah of California, right? It's not possession, it's talking about where she's from. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? Digitally nod your heads. Let me know that you're tracking. Good. What's the next one that we learned? Right, all of these we learned in chapter 12.
Material.
Yeah, very good. Material. Right, next is material. Right, and Mika, how would you describe material?
Like something that an object is made of.
Yeah. So, yeah, noun regarding another noun, modifying another noun regarding its makeup. Right. So if it's right, a sword of iron or a man of steel or something like that. All right. And what's our fourth? Right, our fourth genitive, the fourth kind that we know.
Partitive.
Partitive. Yeah. How would you describe partitive?
I don't know.
That's okay. That one's kind of a tough one to express, right? The partitive noun, right, will almost always have the word pars with it, right? Pars or some other quantitative word, right? So we don't know many of the words that we'll need to express this yet, and we haven't even had pars as a vocab word yet. But if you look on page 82 at the examples, right, we have pars placentae, right, which means a piece of cake, right? So, or a part of cake, right? So if I wanted to say that part of the house was on fire, right, or that half of the students weren't paying attention, right? The genitive is not the pars or the half or the most of, right? That of the students or of the house, that's the genitive, right? So a partitive is going to be a noun connected to a quantitative word, right, with an N. Right? If you'll notice, the partitive and the material are very similar, right? So what kind of sword, right? You could say a sword of iron. If I said what kind of part, you could say the part that was paying attention, right? Partitive and material are very similar, right? But partitive, right, will have a quantitative word, right? That's the really important part, a quantitative word. And a good example is pars. Pars will be a really common one. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Those are the four kinds of genitive that we know. All right, and if you're struggling with that, I'm just going to go ahead and put a little note. If any part of this doesn't make sense to you, you can look at the examples on page 82. Okay? All right, if any of this doesn't make sense, you can look for examples on page 82. All right, let's go ahead and look at the dative. What is the case function of the dative?
Indirect object.
Yeah, very good, an indirect object. And how would you describe an indirect object?
What the verb is like happening to or for.
Good, good. So we translate it with to or for. Right? And it's the direction of the action of the verb. Right? I know that sounds complicated, but it's the direction of the action of the verb. Right? Yeah. The accusative is the direct object, and I get that having the word direction in there makes it confusing, but I can't think of a more helpful way to describe it. Right? The indirect object is not what the verb is happening to, right? It is being indirectly affected by the verb. Maybe that's a more helpful way, right? Indirectly affected by the verb. right? So if I said I opened the jar for my wife, right, then verb is not happening to the indirect object, right? I'm not opening my wife, right? I'm opening the jar, but that action has an indirect effect on my wife, right? Or whatever your indirect object is, right? So an indirect object is a noun which is being indirectly affected by the verb. Let's go ahead and we'll look at the dative and the accusative together. If that's the direction of an or definition of an indirect object, what do you think our definition of a direct object will be? Any ideas?
A noun that is directly affected by the verb.
Yeah, absolutely. A noun that is directly affected by the verb. Right, so, in the case of I opened the jar, right, the verb, right, is directly affecting that object. Okay? There's one other use of the accusative that we've seen a couple of times, but that you guys haven't really been taught yet. You won't be quizzed on this, but I want you to be familiar with it so that when it comes up later, it's not a big surprise. Sometimes, right? Sometimes we see accusative subjects. Does anybody remember a situation when we've seen an accusative subject before? It might have even kind of snuck past you, but we have seen it a couple of times. Right. Kind of. So let's do a sentence together and see if this makes more sense. All right. How about let's use some new vocab just so that we can be practicing it. All right. How about I say, I want Marcus to conquer the town. Let's start by breaking that sentence into two separate parts. Right, the first part is going to be the subject and the verb, and then we have the direct object. Right? I don't want to spend too much time on this because, again, it's not a grammatical concept that we've gone over before, but it's something that we've seen in some of our translations, and understanding it better will be very helpful. Right? So I want Marcus to conquer the town. First of all, let's vary our translation strategy a little bit. To conquer. What Latin form are we going to use of that verb to translate to conquer? Anyone know?
Is it the infinitive?
Yeah, very good. We're going to use the infinitive, right? It's a new word, right? It's on the chapter 13 vocab list, right? It's vincere. Vincere. So I'm just going to, let's just hold on to that for a sec. So remember, to conquer is going to be vincere. Right, but for now, let's start with the front end of the sentence. Right, we know a couple of words for desire or choose, right, or want. Right? What's one of the words that we know that can mean that? Very good. Let's do.
Desidero?
Yeah, very good. Desidero. Let's just use opto. Right, opto is a nice and easy one. How about opto? Right, so we have opto. Now, what case is Marcus? Let's just put the second half of the sentence away for a second, right? And the first half of the sentence is just, I want Marcus, okay? What case is Marcus going to be in? Yeah, it's going to be in the accusative. Marcus is going to be in the accusative because it's the direct object. I want. What do you want? Marcus, right? Marcus is a second conjugation masculine noun, so it's going to be Marcum, right? Opto Marcum, right? To conquer the town. All right. Town is the direct object of vinco, right? How would we translate the town? Oppidum, right? Oppidum. All right. So what we have here is opto, I want, Marcum vincere oppidum. I want Marcus to conquer the town. Now, vincere is the verb in the second part of the sentence. What is the subject of this verb? Yeah, it's Marcus, right? Marcus is the subject of this verb, but Marcus is in the accusative, right? And what we've learned so far is that the subject is going to be in the nominative. Right? What happens is there's some prioritization in this sentence. Is this sentence talking about Marcus conquering the town, or is this sentence talking about me? Right? The primary subject, right, is opto, right, is I. Let's just make this a little bit clearer. Let's say that Julius wants Marcus to conquer the town. Julius is second declension masculine noun, so in the subject, in the nominative, it's just going to be Julius. All right, so what we have is Julius optat Marcum vincere oppidum. The primary sentence, right, the primary clause is Julius wants. Right, the secondary sentence, right, is Marcus to conquer the town. So what happens is Marcus, right, is the direct object of optat. But if you think about it, really, the whole clause here is the direct object. Right? So what do I want? Right, let's say that the sentence was Julius wants food. Right? Julius wants food. Subject, verb, direct object. This sentence is the same, but the direct object is a clause instead of just one word. Right? So in the same way that it's Julius wants food, we have Julius wants Marcus to conquer the town. The entire clause acts like a direct object. So what we have is Marcum being the direct object of optat, but also being the subject of its own clause. If this is confusing, don't worry, we haven't covered this before, but there will be times when you run into things like this on translations. I'm betting that there's one in the translation that you have to do today. But so I don't want that to surprise you guys, and when we do sort of learn it officially, I don't want it to be too tough. So don't worry too much about this, but I just want you guys to know that the accusative, right, can also sometimes be the subject, but only when it's in a secondary clause. So when it comes to translating in English, it's much easier because we don't have cases, right? So if you were given this sentence, Julius optat Marcum vincere oppidum, you'd translate it just like this: Julius wants Marcus to conquer the town, right? These secondary clauses, right, if it's a direct object clause, the verb will always, always, always be in the infinitive, right? So any sentence that starts with I want or I think, right, or any of those sort of verbs of mental activity that necessitate a complex clause to be the direct object, right? The Latin verb will always be in the infinitive, right? So if it's I want to fight, right, or I plan to go to town, or whatever it is, right? If you're going from English to Latin, it will always be in the infinitive. All right, I don't want to camp out here too long, so let's go ahead and move on from this, and let's talk about our different uses of the ablative. The last thing is that the accusative can also be the object of the preposition. Okay, all right, that's the last one for the accusative that we know so far. Let's go on to our different uses of the ablative. All right, so what's the first thing, the first definition or use of the ablative that we know? If you need to, we can look at chapter 11 on page 74. Yeah. So we know means, manner, and separation. And when I pointed you to chapter 11, that was for ablatives with prepositions, which we'll move away from because we know those prepositions. Let's go ahead and look at chapter 9 on page 58. Right, so we have means, manner, and separation. All right, let's go through and describe those. Right, so an ablative of means. Right? First of all, what do we need to do to put an ablative in a sentence? Do we need to have a preposition? Does it need to correspond to the verb? Right, we don't need to have anything to really cue up the ablative. Right, the ablative case works like adverbs. Right, the ablative case adds meaning to the sentence with a noun that gives more meaning to the verb. Right? It acts sort of like a noun adverb. So our first one, ablative of means. Right? How do we use an ablative of means, or how would we translate an ablative of means? We often use the words by, with, or from, right? They call it means or instrument. So an example would be, right, they fight, if we're looking on page 59, right, they fight with weapons. They fight with weapons. So means, right, is what you used to complete the verb. Right? Objects used to do the verb. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? All right, next is manner, right? And generally that's almost always going to be translated just with. All right. Manner is the attitude, right, with which the verb is accomplished. All right, and again, if you need examples of these, it's on page 59. All right, so the examples that they give are magna gratia, right, or multo gaudio, right, describing how the verb was accomplished. And the last one is separation, right? This is almost translated, almost always translated with the word from, right? You need certain verbs, right, to set up an ablative of separation, right? So certain verbs take the ablative, like to free, to lack, or to deprive. All right. So verbs like to free, to lack, or to deprive take the ablative, right? And if you look at the example on page 59, right, we have he kept the troops from town, right? Or the fields are lacking grain, right? So certain verbs that imply separation take the ablative. All right, so those are the 5 noun cases that we know. There are 2 other noun cases, the vocative and the locative, but you don't need to know about those yet. The vocative is just what you use for direct address, right? So if I were to call out and say Marcus, right, they actually have a different noun case for that, for direct address, but we'll learn about that later. Any questions about these
Hey,
noun?
yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Can you go down to the ablative again, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, any questions about these noun cases before I let you guys move on to your translations? So yeah, as far as the accusative subject goes, and again, please don't get confused about that. I just wanted to mention it. Right, but the accusative subject will only happen in a subordinate clause. Right, so you'll only ever have an accusative subject when you already have a nominative subject. Right, so again, in the example of I want, right, to fight, right, or I want Marcus to fight, right, it would be opto Marcum pugnare, right? But it will only ever be in a subordinate clause. Right? Any other questions about this? Right? This sheet, your translation homework is on page 88. Right? What I would like you guys to do is I'm going to send you a survey link. Right? I'm going to send you a survey link like we often do. Right? And you guys can write your translations in a separate Word document and then copy and paste it in. In fact, I would recommend doing that just because once you, if something happens while you're doing the survey, you won't be able to re-access it. But submitting it by way of the survey allows me to have everything together and makes it much easier to grade. So I'm going to send you guys a link to the survey site. Stop showing my screen. Right. I'm going to send you guys a link to the survey site, and that will allow you to enter it there so that I have them all stacked up together. Right. So I'm going to release you guys. I'm going to let you go about 15 minutes early so you can get a jump start on your homework. I'd like you guys to translate the whole thing. It should take a little bit of time, but hopefully this grammar review is really helpful. I'm going to send you guys this grammar review page now, and this should contain all of the grammar that you guys know how to do so far. If you have any questions, please email me tonight, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Any other questions before I let you guys go? All right, God bless you guys. Have a great day. I will see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.